Thank you all for coming. I want to take the opportunity to review the 2016 legislative session, which I think was a win for Indiana. And before I do that, though, let me express a word about the tragic events that took place in Seymour, Indiana yesterday. We grieve in Indiana any loss of human life, but workplace violence came home to the Hoosier State yesterday. And I just wanted to express the condolences and sympathies of the people of Indiana to the family of the victim and to all of the employees at Cummins in Seymour who were shocked and traumatized by these events yesterday. I also want to take the opportunity to commend Chief Bill Abbott and the Seymour Police Department for really outstanding response to this incident. I traveled down to Seymour yesterday, received a briefing from Chief Abbott and members of the law enforcement community, and I met with employees of Cummins in Seymour who were deeply shaken by these events. But I heard again and again their gratitude for the swift and professional response of the law enforcement community. And so they have our thanks, all of those in uniform from all the agencies that responded. But we would particularly commend the Seymour Police Department for their efforts. But we'll, of course, continue to provide any and all support through the Indiana State Police as the investigation into that incident goes forward. As I said, I think the 2016 session of the Indiana General Assembly was a win for Indiana. From the outset of our efforts during this session, we wanted to focus on jobs and economic development, education, and combating the scourge of drug abuse in the state of Indiana. And I am pleased beyond words that we were able to work in a collaborative way with members of both parties in both chambers to move the agenda that we had advanced in this session. I'll give you a couple top lines and then I'll drill down on one in particular. First, over $1 billion for preservation of state and local roads, approved by the Indiana General Assembly, I think is going to make a tremendous investment in our infrastructure and in the infrastructure of our prosperity in this state. I'm also very pleased that we received full funding for all three regions that were awarded in our Regional Cities Initiative. This is an affirmation of a strategy that we implemented through the Regional Cities Initiative that has generated tremendous enthusiasm, not only in the regions that have been awarded the resources now, but in regions all across the state of Indiana. I think for Indiana to grow in our third century, we have to begin to think in new ways, and thinking regionally is part of that, and I couldn't be more grateful that the Indiana General Assembly recognized all three of these regions and provided the resources for it. On the education front, we took decisive steps early in this session to ensure that as we raised standards and introduced a new test, that the teacher bonuses and compensation would not be affected, and that our schools would be treated fairly in those efforts. And I was pleased to sign that into law, strong bipartisan legislation that came alongside our teachers. I'm also grateful for a number of other initiatives that focused on improving our schools. I said in my State of the State address, I thought it was time for us to take a step back from I-STEP and think about new ways and a new system of accountability that could earn the confidence of parents and teachers. And we've taken a decisive step in this session to repeal and replace I-STEP and put together a group that will evaluate the best way that we can create a new exam that will enjoy the confidence of the people of Indiana. Lastly, as I said in my State of the State address, I was very enthusiastic as we deal with the question of teacher shortage all across the country that Speaker Bosma had proposed a Next Generation Scholarship Fund, and we strongly supported that throughout the course of the session. I'm pleased that these new resources for for young men and women that are interested in careers in education are now available for their schooling. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly to me, is that we took decisive steps in confronting the scourge of drug abuse and addiction in the state of Indiana. We've increased penalties now in a bill that will arrive on my desk, increased penalties for those who deal drugs in our state, but we've also made changes in the law that will make it possible for life-saving medicines to be more widely available. And I would say to you, the very codification of HIP 2.0 is a part of our strategy to expand the availability of treatment to Hoosiers that are caught up in the web of addiction. And I'm very pleased about all of that. So with that, let me say on jobs and economic development, infrastructure, regional cities, education, improvements and investments, and investments in healthcare and combating drug abuse. This session was a win for Indiana, and I couldn't be more pleased. But beyond the specifics, let me say I'm also particularly pleased about the way that we did it. We worked together, not only across chambers, but across party lines. And I thought the closing debate last night gave evidence of that. I was frankly, during the debate over the roads bill, I was deeply moved by the statements of leading members of the Democrat minority in the State House. I think it was Leader Pilath who described it as an important step, an aggressive step, and a victory for the people of Indiana, and I couldn't agree more. He also reflected on the fact that it was the first time in his memory, and I've only been around here for 3 years, so I'll take people who have longer memories than me. He says the first time he saw all 4 caucuses come up with a proposal and the administration come up with a proposal. And then we all worked together. I remember early on in this session, I sat down with the Democratic leadership of the House and Senate. We talked about their infrastructure plan. We talked about areas of common ground that we might be able to build an agreement on. I think you see a vote like we saw in the House and in the Senate yesterday, overwhelming bipartisan vote in support of an infrastructure bill that will provide more than $1 billion in resources for state and local roads. I think the accomplishment speaks for itself, but it's a shared accomplishment of this session of the General Assembly, and it's one I'm as proud about the way we did it as about what we did, and I think every Hoosier would find that to be welcome news. Now, you all are glancing at our agenda here. There's one other sheet I would put in front of you, and I don't see a lot of paper in front of these guys, and you want to pass those out, please? Because one other thing I want to do before I get to questions is get to the question of road funding in particular, because this can be very confusing. These are very big numbers. I've been immersed in it for more than the last 6 months, and I wanted to take some time just to walk through this. And let me give the team a chance to pass those over. And while you do that, let's kind of start from the basics. Basically, our administration up to this point has invested, on top of the major moves funding, we appropriated and invested about $1.2 billion, major moves 2020, and last year alone $1 billion in projects, 400 different projects around the state of Indiana. But we came to the conclusion last summer that it would be important for us to seek additional resources, particularly for preservation of roads across the state of Indiana. Now, I think we've been investing in road preservation. I'm very proud of the fact that Indiana's roads and bridges rate above the national average and above all the states that surround us. But if you're the crossroads of America, you're always going to have needs. And so we began last summer to build a proposal and came forward with that, known as the 21st century plan. And many of you were there at the announcement of that. But here are some of the big numbers. According to the Cambridge study that came out, the needs that we had between now and 2020, the Cambridge study came out, is that for state roads is about $876 million. Our 21st century plan for state road funding was basically $1 billion, plus we also said we would be very interested in supporting investments in local roads. We were working, frankly, through the summer with Senator Hirschman on what became the core of his legislation, the transfer of Lowit reserves. And so that's where the need began, $876 million. At the end of the day, when you combine the dollars in the bill that will arrive on my desk of state and federal resources for state and local roads, okay, so for the state of Indiana's roads, the total number that we received is $683 million between now and 2020, okay? And I can break that down for you very easily on the sheet. The total number for local communities in state and federal resources is $997 million. And that's real money that's going to be invested in improving the infrastructure of this state. Now, when you go by the numbers here, and again, I know you all are on long hours and like me, probably a little less sleep than lately. So I'll walk through this and then I'll get to your questions. So the $1.2 billion plan basically starts off in your left column there, if you've got this sheet right here, if you're holding this. $328 million, excess reserves is $228 million, okay? But what we also secured in negotiations was we repurposed $100 million of Major Moves 2020 funding, which under the law could only be used for new construction. You with me? And so by moving that now into preservation, it was found money. So the number is not $228 million, it's $328 million. We made available, second line down, we made available $430 million from the local options income tax reserve. Now, there's been some discussion about that, whether that's $330 million or it's $430 million. Both numbers are a little bit right. We only mandate that 75% be used on roads, okay? But 100% of it can be used on roads. And frankly, as I talk to mayors in communities large and small, they tell me their greatest need is roads and infrastructure. So the whole $430 million can go to infrastructure in local communities. Thirdly, there's $186 million in state reserves that will be made available to local road and bridge, a matching account over the next 2 years. And 50% of that, this is something I'm particularly excited about, 50% of that has to go to counties with less than 50,000 population, okay? Because the nature of the Lowit reserve is that there are certain counties that had larger reserves, and those will be distributed on the basis of where the reserves were collected. But this makes sure that this $186 million, which will be matched by resources at home, whether it's in the bank account or otherwise, or they could use the Lowit reserve to do that. This $186 million, half of that has to go to smaller counties, and so it's a very, very balanced plan between communities large and small. Lastly, it provides $277 million over the next 4 years by redirecting $0.015 in the gasoline use tax to local roads to be phased in. And that $100 million, once that's phased in, that goes on forever. That's what makes this is truly a long-term solution for infrastructure for our local communities. I mean, I think it could be described as a historic investment in local roads and bridges. And I'm very, very proud of that at the end of the day. Now, the reason why I gave my two numbers about the total is we're talking about state and local road investment, but we're also talking about state and federal resources. And so you go into your right column, and you can see $329 million the state will receive in federal transportation dollars. Those numbers were certified in December. So, and it's over and above what we thought we were going to get from that program, all right, before it was signed into law. Second line down, $104 million goes to local communities from the feds. And the first number is the reason why, frankly, if you'll remember my 21st century plan, we proposed, I think, about $240 million in debt. And we listened very intently to members of the General Assembly who didn't want to incur debt, and I said, show me another way to do it, and I'll do it in a heartbeat. And we did. We basically found the money from the federal Treasury to do that. The list goes on down to the bottom, and you can see the 26 million refinancing existing bonds. So, but the big number, and my OMB director is here and is totally available to you for as long as you want to linger around here. The big number we've got, when you add in the state roads between now and 2020, we'll get in state and federal dollars $683 million. Local roads in state and federal dollars will have $997 million to deal with. And on the local side, again, there's go forward money there permanently by moving a penny and a half. And I as I said, some of that can be kind of confusing and totally understandable on that count. But this is a big, big win for Indiana. It represents more than $1 billion in direct state investment in state and local roads. And even more than that when you add in what the federal treasury is going to make available. So I'm very, very pleased about it. And we just, as I said, especially on this project, this was hours and hours and hours of getting people around a table and sitting down and figuring out where the common ground was. And at the end of the day, the people of Indiana won.